Today we're going to learn Shabbat Daf Kuf Lamed Daled. We're going to start at the top. Tanu of Lo Shachak Me'erev Shabbat. It's a quote from the Mishnah on the page before, which is at the bottom of Kuf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph. Im Lo Shachak Me'erev Shabbat Lo Es B'Shinav. Okay, we're talking about a child who has a Brit Milah, and we want to take cumin. Okay, they would use cumin to heal the wound. If you didn't grind it from Erev Shabbat, then you would chew it with your teeth, v'noten. Being low, taraf yayin b'shemen me'erev Shabbat, yinaten ze b'atzmo v'ze b'atzmo. And if you didn't beat up the wine and the oil together with some mixture that they would make to put on the wound, if you didn't beat it up together before Shabbat, then you could put one and you could put the other and put them together. And if they get mixed up on their own, great, but you can't do anything to beat them up. So now the Gemara starts off, Tanu Rabbanan. Dvarim she'en osin l'milah b'Shabbat, osin la b'Yom Tov. Things that you can't do for milah, like we said now, on Shabbat, you can do on Yom Tov. For example, shochakim la kamun v'torfin la yayin b'shemen. You can grind the cumin and you can beat up the yayin, the wine, and the oil. Amar le'abai le'Rav Yosef, ma yishna kamun b'Yom Tov dechaze l'kdera, yayin b'shemen chazunami b'Shabbat l'choleh. What's the reason why cumin can be ground up on Yom Tov? It's because you can use it for cooking, and cooking, any kind of cooking is allowed on Yom Tov, and therefore one can grind it on Yom Tov. But wine and oil could actually be used for a sick person on Shabbat, and therefore we should be allowed to also prepare it for this child. Ditanya, how do we know this? As it says in a Braita, Ein torfin yayin v'shemen l'choleh b'Shabbat. You can't beat wine and oil for a child, for a sick person on Shabbat. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar mishum Rabbi Meir av torfin yayin b'shemen. But Rabbi Meir actually says, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says in the name of Rabbi Meir that you can. Braita continues, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Pam achad chash Rabbi Meir b'me'av, ubikashu l'torfo yayin b'shemen. One time Rabbi Meir had a stomachache, and we wanted to beat up the the oil with the wine. But he didn't allow us, Rabbi Meir, even though he himself says it's allowed, he didn't allow it. We said, what? You're going to go against your own words in your own lifetime? It's one thing, maybe after your lifetime, people will go against what you say, but for you to go against it in your own lifetime, that doesn't make any sense. Amar lanu, he said to us, even though I say so, but chaverai omrim kach, my friends say something else. In other words, even though I say this, my friends say something else. Therefore, I don't want to go against what my friends say, meaning my colleagues disagree with me, and I'm not going to go with what they say. But who knew the machmira nafshe? This is something that was common practice, where if you had certain rabbis who disagree with other rabbis, they didn't want to be disrespectful to the other rabbis and act according to their opinions. However, but it seems clear from here only because he was being stringent on himself because his friends disagree, but theoretically, for everybody else, it's really allowed. I mean, this was a special stringency. He didn't want to go against the other rabbis, and that's why. So now the Gemara wants to understand why, on the one hand, we said, Ein torfin yayin b'shemen on Shabbat, even though theoretically it could be done in another circumstance, which is for someone who's sick. So what do they answer? Hatam lo ba'elicha, hatam ba'elicha. Okay, there's a difference between how it needed to be mixed. For regular choleh, it didn't need to be mixed very well. But for this child who had a Brit Milah, this baby, you needed it to be mixed very well. And therefore, it's a different type of action. Hachanami ni ave v'lo leilach. So why don't we say here, so let's just do it without mixing it as well as we need to. So they say, oh, that's exactly what we said. Hainu dekatani noten ze b'fnei atzmo v'ze b'fnei atzmo. It's exactly what the Mishnah said. It said you could put the wine and put the oil, and if they mix up, great, but you can't actually beat it on your own. And it seems that when Rabbi Meir allowed yayin and shemen together, it wasn't actually beating them, it was kind of leaving them to sit together, or at least mixing it in a much less significant manner. Tanu Rabbanan, Ein mesanenim et hachardal b'misnenet shelo, ve'ein mematkin oto b'gachelet. You can't sift the mustard seeds in a sifter, Okay, there was a way that it would kind of separate the bad from the good. And you can't sweeten it with a coal. Amalei Abaye. Okay, this is actually talking about Yom Tov. Okay, so on Yom Tov, you can't sift the chardal in its sifter, and you can't sweeten it with a coal. Amalei Abaye Rav Yosef. Why can't you do these things? So let's just clarify. You can't do these things because we're going to see it's borer, basically. And borer is not allowed on Yom Tov. Even though certain things are allowed for Ochal Nefesh, borer is not. And why is that, even though you can cook? Well, the reason is, Rashi says, the issue is that you would basically sweeten it by putting it on a coal, but by putting the mustard, I assume they're talking about the leaves, actually. I said before the seed. I assume we mean the leaves. By putting it on the coals, it causes it to do kiboy, what we call, which is when you put out the fire, if you have wood burning and you put out the fire, what happens? So that actually causes it to make coals. And that's the real malacha deoraita of kiboy, of extinguishing. So therefore, since it's going to cause it to extinguish, you're not allowed to do it. So now the Gemara says, Amalei Abaye Rav Yosef. Abaye asked Rav Yosef, but it sounds different. And that's why is it any different from the following Mishnah? You can put an egg in the sifter that they would use for the mustard. When you put the egg in, it doesn't look like borer. Now, what does it mean it doesn't look like borer? Well, there's a bunch of different explanations. Either it means really the egg goes fully through the sifter, and what's the idea? That you're putting it on the mustard, on the leaves, and what do? You put it in the sifter so that it drips out slowly, so it covers the mustard. So therefore, you can do that because you're not actually doing borer. What's borer? Separating the bad from the good. This is in a way of separating from the bad from the good. Everything goes through the sifter. Some people say that when you separate the egg, you're not actually separating bad from good. Maybe you are separating the egg. Maybe the yolk stays at the top and the white goes down to the bottom. But it's not the same as sifting in general because there's no bad and there's no good. Some other explanations are given also, but we'll leave it at that. The hatanya, but doesn't it say? It says you can't sweeten it by putting a coal by it. So what's the difference? Coal made of metal does not actually turn into, if you're burning a fire with matechet, it doesn't actually turn into coals. Whereas if it's made of wood, then it's going to turn into coals. And therefore, it's deoraita, it's going to be kiboy deoraita, extinguishing deoraita if you use the wood, but not if you use metal. Amalei Abaye Rav Yosef. Why is it any different than putting meat on coals? Aren't you worried that when the juice drips out of the meat, it's also going to cause the coals to extinguish? Amalei hatam lo efshar, hacha efshar. A few different interpretations what this means. In the case of the mustard, there's differences. Meat is allowed, mustard is not. So why is that? Because meat is lo efshar. Most people say you can't prepare it before Shabbat because it won't taste as good. You can, but it's going to make a big difference. Whereas the mustard, if you do this before Shabbat, it's not going to taste any different. You're sweetening it and it's fine. Or actually before Yom Tov, I meant. And therefore, if it's done before Yom Tov, it'll be the same. And that's why we only allow malacha that's necessary to do on this day specifically because it will taste better. Okay, that's one option of efshar and lo efshar. Another option in this case is to say that it can't be done. There's no other way to do it. It's when it comes to the meat, there's no other way to do it. Whereas one can sweeten the mustard in a different way, and therefore we don't allow it done in this way. Amalei Abaye Rav Yosef. Mahu legabin. What about preparing cheese? So here they say asur. So they say it's forbidden. So they say ma'ishnami lisha. Why is it different than lisha? It's kind of like lisha. You're making a mixture out of it, like a guppy mixture. So Amalei hatam lo efshar hacha efshar. Again, we have the same answer. And here it seems like everybody agrees that the efshar and lo efshar is that, again, the lisha, when you make a dough for bread, so it's not going to taste good if you make it the day before. Whereas making the cheese, it will be fine if you make it before Yom Tov. So now they say, but in the Nahardea, they say cheese that's 1 day old, that's was made within this day, is the best. So that makes it sound like it is better if it's made fresh. So they say, no, you misunderstood. Aged cheese is actually better. But what they're saying is even fresh cheese is still good. Ein osim la chaluk. Okay, now we go back to the Mishnah, and the Mishnah had said you can't take a rag and make like a bandage for the child. Ein osim la chaluk lechatchila. Actually, I shouldn't say rag. Here it means you shouldn't make a bandage. Aval korech aleh smartut. Okay, but you can just put a rag on top of it. So now the Gemara says, Amar Abai, and from here we're going to start a whole slew of statements that Abai quotes in the name of Amar Li'aim, which is not really his mother, because his mother died in childbirth. It's the woman who took care of him. Okay, he had a menich is called. I can't think of the word in English, but he had someone who took care of him. And he calls her his mother, and she apparently knew all sorts of things. So, Hai Chalukti Yanuka, Lepanya Lesitra Le'ila. You should turn it inside out, basically. Dilma midabe gardamine. We don't want, after the Brit Milah, we don't want strings. If strings could get stuck on where he's injured, he could have a severed urethra, and therefore we don't want that to happen, right? What will happen? The strings will stick to his wound where the scab is, and they'll pull it off, and it will obviously cause injury. Okay, one thing she did, she made a kisita lepalga. Rashi says it was a kis. She would make like a little pocket in the cloth that would function as a bandage. Okay, she would basically sew it inside, and it would basically separate between where there was a Brit Milah and the rest of the clothing. Okay, so she had all these solutions she would have. Amar Abai, hayanuka delele chaluk, lete belita delele sifta. If you don't have a cloth to put on it, so what should you do? Take some worn out garment, which has a hem in it, likarche lesifta litatai, ve'ayif leili ilai. And you should wrap it underneath and turn it inside, right? You should fold it in or fold it out really, so that you don't end up with, again, any threads that are getting near that area. Amar Abai, Amar Li'aim, hayanuka delo yedia mafkate l'shayfe. Delo yedia right. Lo yedia mafkate. Mafkate milashon lahafik, to go out. You don't know where the hole is for the child to go to the bathroom. Okay, we're talking about in the anus. You don't know where the hole is. L'shayfe mishcha, you should put oil on. The lukme lahade yoma, bring it out into sunlight. Vehechi dezig likra'e besarata shti va'are. Where you see it's a little translucent, so then you take a seorah, barley, and you do it shti va'are. You do it, in both directions, up and down, or like up and down and side to side. You make a little cut with the seorah, with the barley. But don't use metal utensils to cut. Mishum dezarif, because it could cause infection and swelling. But Amar Abai, Amar Li'aim, other statements that his mother-in-law told him, his mother who took care of him, not his real mother, but the woman who took care of him. Amar Li'aim, hayanuka delo ma'it. If you have a child who can't nurse, what's the reason? Make her the karpume, his mouth must be cold. So ma'it takante, how do you fix it? Lete kasa digamre, bilinkate le'lahade pume. Get some hot, warm coals and put it near his mouth to warm up his mouth. D'chayim pume, in order to warm his mouth. Umayitz, and then he will nurse. V'amar Abai, Amar Li'aim, another thing she told him, hayanuka delo menashte. Okay, some people think this means can't breathe properly. Others say it means can't urinate. Lin pepe benaflata umenashte. Okay, again, there's two different interpretations of what naflata is. Either it means bring a fan and wave the fan, and then menashte, he'll be able to breathe. Or put him in a sieve, shake him up, and that will help him to urinate. Okay, sounds a little strange, but that's what the Gemara suggests. V'amar Abai, Amar Li'aim, another thing she told him, hayanuka deloma ave. Either it means not breathing, or if you thought the previous one was not breathing, this means not breathing properly enough that the baby can't get sounds out of its mouth. Okay, so you don't hear the sounds properly. Lete slita diime, you take the placenta of the mother, and you should rub it on the child or place it on the child, and it will be able to speak, to breathe properly. Another thing, she seemed to know a lot about babies and issues they were having. If you have a very small infant, leitu lesilta diime, take the placenta, take it from the narrow side to rub it on the child, starting from the narrower side of the placenta to the wider side. And if the baby's too big, then do the opposite. You should take it from the wider side and rub it on to the smaller side. Sounds like it's almost a skula, and one of these mysterious things that if you're kind of showing, we want you to go from big to small or from small to big. Another thing she said, if you have a child who's too red in the body, right, face or body, that the blood hasn't been absorbed into the flesh yet, meaning the blood is kind of in between the flesh and the skin and it's kind of stuck there. So you should wait for the Brit Milah until the blood gets absorbed into the body, and only then should you do the Brit Milah, because otherwise what will happen, you'll do the Brit Milah, and if the blood is all there and it's not absorbed inside the body, the child will bleed tremendously. The yarik, if the baby's green, which really means yellow, okay, for those who need to know that often they say green and they really mean yellow. If the baby's jaundiced, akate lo nafel beidame, means the blood is not yet circulating in the body. Litarchu ad nafel beidame, wait till the blood is going. Vilim hule. We know this from today. Jaundiced children often wait, right? They always wait to have a Brit Milah until their numbers are stronger. Ditanya. Amar Rabbi Natan. Now we're going to have a story. Rabbi Natan says, I went abroad, ubat isha lefanai, shamala ben arishon umet, sheni v'met. Now, generally, there's a big machloket. This is what we call a machloket about chazaka. Chazaka there's a machloket always about chazaka, whether you establish. Chazaka is when we establish that the following thing will definitely happen, and that's either after 2 times of something occurring or 3 times. There's a big debate about whether it's 2 or 3, comes up in many places. Here also, after 2 children die from Brit Milah, so some people say you don't give the third a Brit Milah. Now, what happened in this case? So after 2 died from a Brit Milah, so the third one they brought before me, Uri'itiv, Shuadom, I saw he was very red. You should wait until the blood gets absorbed. And he survived. So what do you see here? You see that even though, now it's unclear, either he held Chazaka's 3, and therefore you could wait till the 4th son to say, I'm not doing a Brit Milah. But even if he held, it would be 2, and then you don't have to do a Brit Milah on the 3rd. But in this case, he realized that the reason the children had died was because she didn't wait. So he said, even if normally I wouldn't let you, in this case you can, because it's clear what the issue is, and therefore, wait. And what happened? What's the end of the story? They ended up calling him Natan the Bavli in my name, because he was Rabbi Natan, and then they called this child Natan the Bavli in his name because he saved his life. Another time, the same kind of thing happened. He was in Kapotkia. So the first 2 children died. They brought the 3rd one in front of me. I saw he was yellow, jaundiced. So and I saw this child has no blood in his body. Again, there's no blood, but right, low in blood. Amartila hamtini lo ad sheyipo damo. Wait until his blood starts going. V'imtina lo v'mala oto v'chaya, and he lived. You korin shmo Natan Bavli al shmo, and they called him Natan Bavli based on the name of Rabbi Natan. Al Shmi, because he was telling the story. They called him in my name. Okay, new Mishnah. Marchitzin et hakatan bein lifnei milah ubein la'achar milah. You're allowed to wash. We're going to get into exactly what does this mean and when was the water heated up. Remember, we learned you can wash your body if the water was heated up before Shabbat, right? But you can't even wash with water that was heated because we're worried. And you can actually wash with cold water, but then they said you can't even wash with hot water because even if you heat it up before Shabbat, we're worried that you might come to heat up on Shabbat. But when it comes to a child who's had a Brit Milah, now we say, Bein lifnei milah, bein la'achar milah. Both before the Brit Milah, they would wash the child, and after. So both are allowed. Umizalfina la biyad v'lo b'kli. But you sprinkle the water with your hand and not with a utensil. We're going to see how this fits in with the first sentence, because the first sentence seemed to sound like marchitzim, you can wash the baby in a normal way, and then all of a sudden it says only with your yad, with your hand, and not with a utensil. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah omer, marchitzim et hakatan bayom hashlishi shechal liot b'Shabbat. You can even do it on the third day after the Brit Milah. And why is that? Shneimar, vayhi bayom hashlishi b'yotam koavim, famous story of Shechem. They went to them on the third day when they were specifically in pain. What do you see here? There's a big debate always when we talk about this third day. Was it specifically on the third day? Or is it on the first, second, and third day? Does it mean, obviously, from the Brit Milah for the first 3 days, this sounds like the Yoledet. She's got those first 3 days. Or when it comes to Brit Milah, is it specifically on day number 3 where it's the most of a problem, where it becomes a big problem? So there's a debate among the Rishonim. The Rambam says it's actually 1, 2, and 3, right? It's all the days. But others say it's specifically on the third day. If you have a child who we're not sure if they're supposed to do a Brit Milah today or not, could be different reasons why it's safek. Like, for example, if Rashi says, safek ben shmona chodashim. In the days of the Gemara, they had this assumption that babies are either born in the 7th month, after 7 months of pregnancy, or 9 months. There's either premature 7 months or 9 months. But if there's an 8-month baby, you're born after 8 months, the assumption is, or within the 8th month, the assumption is that's a baby that's not going to survive. So if you have a child like that, we don't allow you to do the Brit Milah on Shabbat, because the assumption is that baby will likely not survive. Androgynous is a child who has both male and female genitalia, and that kind of child, even though needs a Brit Milah, ein mechalim et Shabbat, because it's safek, maybe it's male, maybe it's female, so maybe it's not obligating Brit Milah. Rabbi Yehuda matir b'androgynous, he says, no, you can. Okay, we'll get to androgynous in the next shiur. So now the Gemara says, "V'ha'amar reisha marchitzim," but doesn't the reisha say you can wash? And then it says after that, "Mizalfim alav biyad," you pour it by hand. So Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabba bar Avua, this is the first interpretation. Da'amrit Ravayu, Ketzad Tane. How do we read this Mishnah? Marchitzim et hakatan bein lifnei milah bein la'achar milah. Ketzad, you can wash the child. How can you do it? Mizalfin alav biyad v'lo b'kli. You can only do it by hand, but not with a utensil. Amarava. Rava says, how can you read the Mishnah that way? It says you can wash. Wash means in a normal manner. It doesn't mean pour some water on. Ela amarava, so Rava understands it differently. Hachi katani. This is how you should read it. Marchitzim et hakatan, bein milifnei milah, bein la'achar milah, whether before the Brit Milah or whether after the Brit Milah, in a normal way. Bayom harishon kidarko, on the first day of the day of the Brit, a normal, wash the baby normally. But if the third day falls out on a Shabbat, then on the third day, even though we allow you to wash, in that case we only allow you to wash by pouring some water on with your hand, not with a utensil. Then comes Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and what does he say? Elazar ben Azariah omer marchitzim et hakatan bayom hashlishi shechal liot b'Shabbat, meaning you can wash the child in a normal manner. As the verse says. Tanya Kavate de Rava, so we have 2 options. Either you can wash the baby normally, just not on the third day, versus Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah who says even on the third day you can. Or Rabbi Bar, that was Rava, and Rabbi Ravua and Rabbi Yehuda said no. Even on the first day, you can't wash normally. And then Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah comes and says you can even wash on the third day, and we'll get to that soon. So Tanya Kavate de Rava. There's a bright to support Rava's reading. Here goes. Marchitzim hakatam bein milifnei milah bein la'achar milah. B'yom rishon kidarko u'b'yom shlishi shechal liot b'Shabbat mizalfin alav biyad. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah omer marchitzim et hakatam b'yom shlishi shechal liot b'Shabbat. Okay, so far same exact thing we have. Right, this is what Rava said. This says it explicitly. The first day, any way you want. The third day, mizalfin alav biyad. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says no. Even on the third day, you can wash normally. Now, instead of our Mishnah, which said Shene'amar, as it says in the Pasuk, now they say, well, listen, we don't have a clear proof from the verse, but we have a zecher ledavar. There's an allusion to it. Shene'amar v'yibayam shlishi b'yotam koavim. Okay, we'll get back to why does this source say there's only a reference to it and it's not clear. Okay, shehem mizafin. Now the Braita continues. When you pour, aim mizafin lo bekos v'lo bekara v'lo bekli ela b'yad. And now they explain when we talk about pouring water, what we mean is not with a utensil, not with a cup, not with a bowl, not with any sort of utensil, but by hand. Atan l'tanakama, and that's Atan l'tanakama, right? And then that line, okay, that line about when you say mizalfin, that obviously is Tanakama's opinion. Why does it say, even though there's no clear proof? They have a good reason here. They say, Mishum de gadol lo salik bisra haya. Katan salik be bisra haya. Haya means quickly. What do we know the difference between older people and younger people? In this case of Shchen, it was older people who had a Brit Milah. Now, older people take much longer to heal than younger people. So therefore, it's not a perfect proof, because it could be that younger children aren't in pain anymore on the third day, and therefore you might not have allowed it, and that's why the verse is only an illusion. It's not a clear proof, because the verse was not about newborns. So then there was a person who came in front of Rava. He said, you could do exactly as I said, which is you can wash normally for the first day. Ichlish Rava, but then Rava got sick. Amar, he tried to do some self-introspection. He said, what did I do wrong that I'm sick, right? They always viewed disease as something I must have done wrong, as punishment from God. Amar, ana bahade targimna disabe lamali. Why did I get involved in an argument with my elders, right? Rav Yehuda and Rabbi Baravua didn't agree with me. Why did I start arguing with them? And why did I start saying something else? Amrle Rabbanan the Rava, but the rabbis come to Rava to try to make him feel better and say, but don't you have a braita that supports your reading? We already said that. Amar lehu manitin kavataychu. But really, the Mishnah seems to be more, the pshat of the Mishnah seems to match better Rabbi Baravua and Rav Yehuda. Daika. Can be more, one can derive from there, mimai. From where can we derive that they have a better reading of our Mishnah? And if you have a braita and a Mishnah, always the Mishnah is stronger than a braita. So even though he had a braita that said explicitly what he said, the implied reading of the Mishnah seems to go against him. How so? It says, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, so why does that line prove Rabbi Baravua and Rav Yehuda more so than Rava? Again, they said, is all the first day. And then Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, you can be marchitzim by Yom HaShlishi. So, if the whole thing is talking about that you can only do it with your hand, that's why he said, no, you can actually wash on the third day. But if Tanakama was saying, you can wash on the first day, but on the third day, you can only do ziluf, right? You can only sprinkle the water on. Then, when Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah omer marchitzim, he says you can wash af marchitzim ebayle. When he says you can wash, it sounds like they don't think you can wash. So what he's saying is you can wash. But if they think that that always mizalfin, right? That they think mizalfin in general on all the days, and he says marchitzim. If my mistake, if Iyamar Tanakam marchitzim b'yom rishon mizalfin, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah marchitzim af marchitzim ebayale. It should have said, right? If it's that, like Rava, that marchitzim b'yom rishon and then mizalfin b'yom shlishi. When Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says marchitzim, he should say not only can you do ziluf, you can even do rachatza. Okay, but according to the first reading, Tanakama is saying you can wash the first day only with ziluf, and comes Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and he says, no, you can even wash on the third day, right? He's talking about something they weren't even relating to, which is the third day. But if they think that you could sprinkle water, and he says you can wash, he should say you can even wash on the third day. And therefore, it seems to be Rava, at least, is saying the simple reading of the Mishnah could more easily match their opinion than mine. Let's see what we actually hold now. Do we hold by Tanakama or do we hold by Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah? And do we hold like Rava's reading, that's the more lenient reading, or do we hold like the other reading? Okay, again, they're mainly disagreeing with Tanakama, so, well, if we don't hold like Tanakama, that doesn't really matter. So, Kiata Rav Dimi, Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Amar Rabbi Elazar, sorry, confusing the Rabbi Elazars. This is Rabbi Elazar the Tana. The Amora, when Rav Dimi came from Israel, he quoted in the name of Rabbi Elazar, the Amora who lived in Israel, Halakha Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Okay, we hold like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah that you can even do it on, you can even be marchitzin, you can even wash on the third day. Havu baba ma'arav. But they asked in Eretz Israel, harchatzat kol gufo or harchatzat milah? Do we mean the whole body or do we mean just where he had the brit milah? So they say, Rabbanan Rabbi Yaakov Shmei, one rabbi, and his name was Rabbi Yaakov, mistabra harchatzat kol gufo. Must be his whole body. Why? We already know it's allowed to put hot water on a wound, so you wouldn't need to say so if it's just on where he had the brit milah. That's just a regular wound. So it must mean his whole body. Tamarav, how do we know that you can put hot water on a makah? Because Rav says, Ein monim chamim v'shemen sheme'al gabei makah b'Shabbat. You don't have to prevent people from putting hot water or oil on a wound on Shabbat, meaning you can put out water on. So if you can put out water, then you can obviously put out water on the milah, and therefore this must mean his whole body. Matkef la Rav Yosef. But wait, you're assuming hot water means hot water the same in every place. No, but there's two types of hot water on Shabbat. There's hot water that was heated up before Shabbat. That's the kind of hot water you can put on a makah b'Shabbat. But in a brit milah, we allow you even to warm the water on Shabbat. So why are you comparing these two things, right? Don't you distinguish? Matkef la Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi questions back and says, why are you assuming our Mishnah is talking about water that was heated on Shabbat? Maybe they're arguing about water that was heated from before Shabbat. So maybe our Mishnah is only referring to water heated before Shabbat. But Rabbi Yosef tried to say it's not. It means water from, you can even heat water on Shabbat to bathe the child, which would mean that maybe it's only to treat the injury, only to wash the injury, and not right where he has the brit milah and not anywhere else. Okay, that's what Rav Yosef tried to say. So it comes from Dimi, and he says maybe this is talking about from water before Shabbat, which would mean that then it would allow the entire body, because obviously if it was heated up before Shabbat, we already learned you could put it on any wound, and therefore they're not talking about only where there's a wound, they're talking about the whole body. So Amar Abai, Anabai de Ishane le v'kadam v'shane. I wanted to answer this, but Kadam v'shane le Rav Yosef. But Rav Yosef actually brought it the answer before me. Okay, the reason that it's clear. In other words, they said, why is it so clear that the argument in the Mishnah is about water heated up on Shabbat? So Rav Yosef says it's clear because it's dangerous for this child, and since the child's in a dangerous position, we're obviously going to allow water to be heated up on Shabbat. Itmar nami. Okay, which then again, Rav Yosef's going to say, maybe though it's only for the wound and not for anything else. Itmar nami, it was also said, not only did Rav Dimi come and say, halacha like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, but also Ravin said in the name of Rabbi Abba and the name of Rabbi Elazar. Some people say he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, halacha Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, bein chamim shuchmu b'Shabbat, bein chamim shuchmu me'erev Shabbat. Here we get more detail. Even if it was from Erev Shabbat, bein archatzat kol gufo, bein archatzat milah, whether it's his whole body or just where the brit milah is, meaning everything is allowed. Mipnei shesakana ilo, and here again we see the agenda of the rabbis to be as lenient as possible when it comes to anything that possibly has danger, some sort of danger to a person. Gufa. Now we're going to go back to this other issue that we talked about back to the issue of medicine on Shabbat. Amarav, ein monim chamim b'shemen me'al gabei makah b'Shabbat. U'Shmuel amar noten chutz l'makah v'shotet yored l'makah. Rav says you can put out water and oil on a wound on Shabbat, but Shmuel says you put it near the wound, not on the wound, and it drips down to the wound. You shouldn't put it directly on the wound. You should do it somewhat differently. Meitive. Now they ask a question on Shmuel from the following source. Ein notim shemen v'chamin al gabei moch litein al gabei makah b'Shabbat. So what do you see here? You can't put, actually it's a question on Rav, my mistake. Question on Rav, it says you can't put shemen and kamin al gabei moch l'tein al makah b'Shabbat. So you can't put it on some sort of like cotton type bandage to put on a makah b'Shabbat. So how could he say you don't prevent water and hot water and oil? You can put it on. So the answer, hata mishum schita. This is because you might come to squeeze it. That's different than just pouring it on the wound itself directly. Tashma, now they say, look at this source. But here you see it's not because of schita, because you can't put it on the moch. If the moch is already on, I understand if you're going to put the moch on, you can't put it on the moch and then put it on. You might squeeze it as you're putting it on. But if it's already on the bandage, you can't put shemen or hot water on the moch if it's already on the wound. So there you see it's not a schita issue. So again, question on Rav. What do they answer? No, even when it's on you, you still might come to squeeze it. Tanya kavatei de Shmuel. Now we bring a bright to support Shmuel. Ein notnim chamim b'shemen al gabei makah b'Shabbat, aval notnim chutz lamakah v'shotet v'yored lamakah. Here you have exactly what Shmuel says in a bright. Tanu Rabbanan. Notnin al gabei makah moch yavesh usfog yavesh. You can put this cotton kind of bandage that's dry or a dry sponge. Aval lo gemi yavesh. You can't put a reed that's dry. Velo katitin yaveshim, and not rags, pieces of cloth that are dry. So kasha katitin akatitin. And moch yavesh is really not much different than katitin. They're both kind of rags, cloth, something like that. So the answer, lo kasha habachadite habatike. One is old and one is new. What's the difference? That if it's new, then it actually heals. And that's why you can't put it on. If it's old, then the assumption is it doesn't heal at all. And that's why it said you can't put new ones on, but you can put old ones on. Amar Bai, Shmamina, Hani Katitim Masu. From here you can learn that these types of rags actually heal. So if they're new, then they heal, and therefore you can't use them on Shabbat. This will finish for today. We'll pick up on Sunday with the new daf. Shabbat Shalom or Shavua Tov, depending on when you're listening.